Hello all, I'm Cal Kidman and welcome to Breaking on the Daily, where today we have the impeachment trial has begun of Trump, the second one. And yeah, it's not going anywhere. It got through where they called it constitutional, despite the fact that, based on all historical evidence, it isn't. And that's what was voted on today. A lot of meandering nonsense and things being talked about, and man, it's just really boring. And so I really didn't want to talk about it today, and I'm not going to. And the reason being is because I think the weird thing is that a lot of things have just kind of popped up, and a lot of things are kind of coming to light that seem to be quite conveniently covered up by this sort of particular story. And so I kind of wanted to shift the focus and be kind of a different video for you guys who are scrolling through BitChute or wherever you're scrolling through and seeing tons upon tons of videos about impeachment purely, and rather to look at all of the failings of the Biden administration and certain other things that have been going on over the past few days. Because we're going to begin with our first story, and this is a story of Biden essentially capitulating to China, where he has scrapped Trump's mandate for universities to report Chinese dealings. So, what he did is he said, you know that sort of transparency thing that we want to have with our universities, that we want to cultivate, and we want to be able to see whether they're being funded by foreign governments? Yeah, let's get rid of that. That sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? Yeah. I'm amazed, because Biden has been pulling this thing over the past few weeks, I'd say, where he has been talking a lot of trash about China and has been really talking tough. I'll admit it. And the fact that he's Beijing Biden kind of made this a bit strange. But throughout all of this, I expected that it would be nothing but talk. And this is good evidence of that. Because for those who haven't covered or seen the university story in any sort of depth, this particular story is one of the most infuriating stories I've ever personally bared witness to, where the universities, they have these things called essentially Confucius Institutes, and this was a thing that was going on for a long time, and the Trump administration said these guys are essentially spying institutions, and they report directly to the Chinese government. And so if you have these into your school, all of your data is probably already on Chinese servers currently, because that's what some of these people were at least alleged to do. And on top of that, you have a lot of universities refusing to give up documents that are presumed, at least, to hold information showing their Chinese funding. And this has been one of the most subversive things that China has done over the past few decades. They have really infected the universities, and it's similar to sort of the same thing that Russia was doing and the Soviet Union was doing back in the 60s. It's strange. It's how these sort of things repeat. It's almost as if it's a strategy. But this has been insipid, because what has occurred is that there are so many things that are happening. And these are schools, by the way, that are getting public funding from the federal government and are obligated, are supposed to be obligated at least, to disclose foreign funding, but they're refusing to do it because it's China. And Biden's been buddying up to China, in his actions all over the place. And China has essentially been treating Biden like they have him in their pocket, which I think is fair, considering the guy seems to be in their pockets, especially with the Hunter Biden story and the like. That's what it seems to be. This story, though, is quite insane. It really just displays how all of the sort of tough talk you get from Biden on occasion is really just fake nonsense. It's there to placate certain people who are willing to just look at the rhetoric of certain people and accept that as their position, completely ignoring their actual action on that front. You'll see the same sort of thing and tendency go along with people who try to eminently continually claim that people like Liz Cheney are not rhinos. It's the same argument, essentially, that, oh, no, this person isn't a rhino, or this person isn't in the pocket of China, because look at what they're saying, man. They have this all fiery rhetoric at times. But when it comes down to brass tacks, a lot of these people end up going the other way. Liz Cheney isn't a reliable vote for conservative agendas. Biden is certainly not a reliable vote for America's interest over China's. That's certainly not the case. And this is just a very good example of such. And he's been trying to back off of a lot of transparency projects you've seen in the Trump administration. Another thing you've also seen from Biden is him rolling back regulatory transparency. Another ridiculous thing to do that makes him look like essentially a dictator. It doesn't make him look good. I don't think many people would disagree on that front, but of course he keeps doing it. And it's not only just a lack of transparency, and that is a real reversal from what was happening in the Trump administration, despite all of the people's whining and mewling about him not being transparent for some reason. That was the most inane criticism of Trump as well. You also see the rampant lying and campaign promise breaking in the Biden administration that has occurred even within the first few weeks, because Jen Psaki has walked back Biden's campaign promise to open schools within 100 days. And essentially the explanation is, oh yeah, we'll open the schools in 100 days. Around 50% of them. And they'll only really be open for like a day in a week. But they'll be open, they'll exist. Obviously, this is a huge break of a campaign promise, and it has been a common occurrence among the Biden administration, particularly among COVID things. You can go on to $2,000 stimulus checks, going to $1,400, and maybe not even that at all, with means tested, which, by the way, is just a good idea, period. You shouldn't be able to vote yourself money. It really does show the decline of the republic that people think they can just vote for themselves money now. And that's the reason the Democrats won the Senate, if you believe the election was legitimate. Utterly insane. Utterly insane. And you see a lot of that sort of stuff. And you also saw it on him saying, oh no, we can't actually do anything about the pandemic, despite his constant talking about how, oh no, you could do stuff about the pandemic, Donald Trump. Just do it. Well, he was campaigning and wasn't actually in office. But as soon as he gets in office, no, we can't do anything. It's just going to go as it will. Because that's the truth of the matter. And a lot of this, I think, partially has to do with, I imagine, a very undercovered and probably memory hold statistic that has been released that I don't think a lot of people are going to talk about. And that is, only half of the people in the country plan to get a COVID-19 vaccine. The CDC has actually found. So it's not like this is some sort of out there right-wing sort of thing. This is probably even biased sampling in this case, because the CDC obviously doesn't want to make themselves look bad by having the vaccine only be taken by 50% of people. That makes them look bad. But what I want to explore more than just these raw numbers of it is actually the why of this. And the reason for that is, and the reason for why this statistic is how it is in large respect not due to anti-vaxxers or people who think that all vaccines give autism or something like that. No, it has nothing to do with that. I would argue, actually, that this particular statistic has everything to do with how the medical experts have been pushing the vaccine. Because the fact of the matter is, they really haven't been. I mean, yeah, they've been saying for people to get vaccinated, but look at their deeper language, look at their actual argumentation and things that they talk about surrounding that constant and continuing rejoinder, and you'll see that their argumentation does not spur confidence. The reason being, one of the major reasons being, is that even after you get a vaccine, people like Fauci and lots of other doctors have been saying, well, you still need to wear a mask, even if you have a vaccine. Okay. And they're also saying, well, even if you get a vaccine, you still might get sick. Even if you might get a vaccine, it might not work. And in that case, why would I get a vaccine? And that is a question that has been asked by whole lots of people. A whole bunch of people. And I think I've even asked that same question before. And I think that question has been answered by about 50% of the American people. And that is no, they're not getting a vaccine. And it's really not surprising. And I think the reason for the pushing of masks, even beyond vaccines, and I think it has to do with fundamentally what the masks are. Because the masks aren't designed to work. They aren't designed to work. They don't work. All the evidence for them working is a model or a woefully inadequate controlled lab study that doesn't actually determine whether it works at all. That's sort of the two camps where you have models that are literally fabricated statistics and very controlled, not at all representative of reality, lab studies that don't even replicate real life scenarios or actually determine whether it works at all. That's been kind of the evidence for masks. And I think one of the most telling clips I've seen in a long time, and if I find it and I remember it, I'll put it in here when I'm editing, was a clip of a doctor saying, essentially, I'm not wearing this mask because it works. I'm wearing this mask because it makes it look like I care. And that's kind of the same argument that's being made here. And I think that's why, but they can't make that argument directly because it makes them look like they're doing this for selfish political reasons and aren't actually doing it because it matters for the virus. And I think it's the same reason that people still need to wear masks, and they're still mandated to wear masks, even if they've had coronavirus and have antibodies. Even at that point. It's the reason why people complain about Rand Paul not wearing a mask, despite the fact that he's had the virus and has antibodies and cannot get it again and cannot pass it. It's the exact same reason they're complaining about him. He doesn't need to wear a mask. At least not by any scientific measure. By any reasonable measure. Logical measure. You don't even need to go to science. Because if you've already gotten the thing and can no longer pass it, which is the nature of getting a disease and then getting over it, why exactly do you need to wear a mask to either A, prevent you from getting the disease, again, even if you're immune to it, or prevent you from passing it to someone else, despite the fact that you can't pass it? That doesn't actually make sense. Because it really is, as I would describe, a forward-facing policy. It is purely a forward-facing policy that is there not to actually solve any problems, but rather to make it look like you care about a problem. It's the same justification for the NFL players or any particular sports ball players kneeling during the national anthem. It's not actually about solving any issues because it's not going to solve an issue. It's all to make it look like you care. It's the same thing with charities, and you see charities that are there to spread awareness of a particular issue and don't actually spend a whole lot of money on actually solving the issue. Yeah, it's the same argument there, where they argue their value is in bringing awareness to it, rather than actually solving the issue, which is utterly absurd. It doesn't work. It's functionally non-existent. What you're fundamentally doing is worthless. And that's what a lot of things, it has really infected our culture on a very deep level. But to move on to our last story, and this has been something that has been talked about in many left-wing outlets, and I picked The Guardian particularly because their article annoyed me, and it was the first one I saw, where it is now being claimed, and I do say claims for a reason, that 8.7 million deaths globally in 2018 were caused by fossil fuels. Ooh boy. Yeah, we're going to go through the methodology of this particular study that's being referred to here because it is just not true. Or at least it is unfalsifiable. You cannot prove this claim. And the reason I say this, and I'll get to that later. I'll get to the reason I'm saying this later. But we'll start with the Guardian article in particular, which begins by making the claim uncritically and saying, oh, a study has found this number when it hasn't, because guess what? It's a model. It's not actually numbers. They didn't find anything. They created it out of whole cloth. But we'll get to that. And this particular Guardian article is very annoying to me. Reason being, it doesn't link to the original source. It doesn't link even to the Harvard write-up of the study. It doesn't link to that. It's not as though this particular story doesn't link to anything. No. It links to lots of other nonsensical studies, and even some okay ones that have nothing to do with it, or have less to do with it, are tangentially related. But it doesn't link to the original story. It doesn't link to the original thing. So I had to go looking for this, and no, it wasn't particularly difficult. I just looked it up, and it was all over the place. And then I found the Harvard read-up, which is detailed enough, and I can't actually find the original study, but I don't think I need to, because the Harvard study is detailed enough for me to get my points across, and so I'm just going to use that. And to move on to that particular part of the story, the Harvard read-up of it, you'll notice in this article that it starts with an explanation of the methodology for how they determined how much particular air pollution is in any part of the world. And that's what they do. That's what they start with. They do this long, detailed, and frankly interesting explanation as to how they did it. And they did it a lot. They explained the original methodology that was done for a lower number that is probably also fake. Well, I can pretty much guarantee it's fake because this sort of thing, and I'll explain it later, it can't be really determined. And it explains that. It explains that it was essentially sensing particles in the air, and they were just doing that all over the world, and that they were then just doing that. But the limitation of that is that it couldn't differentiate between different types of pollution. It can only just measure pollution. And this new thing is a model, and it is, I actually would argue, more of an estimate of global chemistry, air chemistry. Using a NASA database that uses essentially what sort of things are in the area and that sort of thing are all being measured, and how much they output per year and all that sort of stuff. All very interesting stuff. And this is a case, actually, of a model that I'm okay with. I don't think this model is perfect. I don't think this model is necessarily, the end-all be-all of how to get the air chemistry of any particular place. I do think the original methodology is also good, and I would argue even superior in certain aspects, in that it is not an estimate, but rather an actual measurement. Which is an absurdity in this article, is that they call this methodology improved. It is not improved, it's just different. And this one also has advantages. Obviously, the fact that it can differentiate between different pollutants. And all of this stuff is very, very detailed. And as you notice from what I'm talking about, yeah, it's very detailed, and it is interesting. And then you get to the point where they try to determine, from this, how many deaths can be attributed to fossil fuels. And then it gets a whole lot more vague. And then, suddenly, it goes from, very detailed, line-by-line examples of how exactly they did everything they did, to 8 million deaths. That's kind of what it goes from. And I could tell you the reason for this, because the connections between 8 million of these 8 million deaths are essentially worthless. In large respect, because it's not actually done by per capita. If it was, then there wouldn't be. Another thing this study finds is that large population areas and essentially places that have a lot of industrial working and thus have a lot of fossil fuels and things going on have more deaths with regard to fossil fuels, which shouldn't be strange. Reason being that there are more people there. If I were to make, and to display exactly the absurdity of this claim, and to explain why you shouldn't trust these sort of things, is because I could make the exact opposite claim, almost to the letter, about the exact same thing, by saying, if you live in a place that has a whole lot of fossil fuels, you have a longer life expectancy. You have higher living standards, less poverty, higher medium income. You'll have more access to transportation. You'll have more access to all sorts of things. You'll have more access to industry. You'll be richer. All of that sort of stuff. Because here's the thing. This, essentially, measures deaths. And it doesn't attribute all deaths in a particular place to fossil fuels. It doesn't. But it attributes a lot of them to it, and almost unjustifiably, because it doesn't seem that there's any direct connection to these deaths, and if anything, it's a light indirect connection. It's not like in the autopsy report, you have on the death certificate pollution as one of the major causes of death. No, you have other things which they can tenuously link to, potentially, to pollution, but are not inherently linked to pollution, and are more well correlated with people being old. This claim is unfalsifiable because it is a fake, made-up number that is determined based on almost entirely subjective metrics, because how many heart attacks you ascribe to fossil fuels is entirely up to you. Because it could be anywhere from essentially none to all of them. That's why this number is so flexible. That's why it can go from 4 million to 8 million, all describing the exact same year. But of course, it's described, this methodology, as improved over the last one. The last one, of course, I imagine is also fabricated numbers, as is the nature of this sort of study. But this is just even worse. It's not better. As I've already described, the actual gathering of data for pollution isn't actually better, it's just different. It's better in certain ways, it's also worse in certain ways. It's not better, okay? And this is just, it's infuriating. It really is infuriating to see this sort of stuff be rampant among the what I would call the political sciences. And no, I'm not referring to political science. I'm not referring to the science of politics, as if that's even really a thing. I'm referring to the sciences which refer to the actual political policy and advocate for such policy and also enact such policy. Because these sorts of sciences are absolutely filled to the brim with this sort of modeling data that is there only to justify policy and not actually be useful data in the normal space. So you'll see a lot of people throwing around this statistic. But whenever you see it, if you see this statistic just out in the open, be aware this statistic is fake. This statistic is not real. It was created out of whole cloth with a model, which, as I've already described in many occasions, is pseudoscience. It is not the study of the natural world. It's the study of a computer model that the scientists themselves made. It's literally a description of something that does not properly exist in the real world. It is not the study of the natural world. But definitionally, it is pseudoscience. The only difference between this and psychic plants is that this is accepted by and large by a lot of the scientific community. And the reason it is because they have all the grant money. At least that's my belief. Man, I really went on a rant there. And, if you enjoyed that rant, hey, subscribe wherever you are other than YouTube, then subscribe anywhere else. Follow me on Minds or Gab or wherever. If Parler's back up by the time you see this video, hey, follow me there, who knows what's going to happen. And, I'm going to leave you there, because this has been Breaking on the Daily. I'm Kel Kidman, and I'm out.